Hey everybody. Hi. We're going to be using a couple reference images later, which you can download here. If you don't already have Autodesk Maya, just Google Autodesk Maya and you can get a student version with your student email. Amazing. Download. Yep, there he is. Okay, so first I'll give you a brief tour of our UI. Maya can seem a little intimidating at first, but it's actually not as bad as it seems. So to start, we'll be on the modeling tool menu here. We've got a lot of different options. So the most basic things we'll have, you can see here, is creating polygons. So you can click one and boom, you have a cube. Over here we have the tools for editing the components of the cube. And here we've got all the many window and menu things. Of course, you'll want to save your scene as something. I'll just save it to the desktop. Something you want to do when using Maya is save and save frequently, and save varying versions of your file, iteratively save. So whenever you're actively working on a project, keep an archive of things. So I'm going to save this as project 1. Give it a better name than that when you're actually doing projects. And Maya also has this handy option called increment and save, which just saves it as a separate file. As you can see, you have project 1 and project 1.0001. And you want to do this pretty often because if the program crashes, you can lose a lot of work or make the file corrupt, so it's important to have backup versions. Yeah, so make sure to try to stay organized. The increment and save makes it easy to organize your stuff. It keeps it the same name and automatically just increments the number after. When saving, you want to use Maya binary generally, not Maya ASCII. Okay, so we have a polygon here. How do we edit it? So the basic tools for editing polygons in Maya is move, rotate, and scale. The hotkeys for these is WER. You can also click them on the sidebar here. Oops. Translate is W, and it's pretty self-explanatory. You grab one of these arrow handles here, and you can move stuff around. If you grab this center square here, it will move flat to the camera. So this can get kind of confusing pretty fast if you're not careful. So usually I recommend just using the handles. Rotate obviously rotates. Again with these curved handles. The outer one moves it flat to the camera. And scale works the same way. Grabbing a single handle will stretch it. Grabbing the center handle will scale the entire thing. Yep. Actually, it doesn't really make much of a difference. It will just, Maya automatically adjusts for that. It won't turn it inside out or anything. Now, that's when you're scaling entire objects. When we get into components and you start doing stuff like that, it can get pretty ugly. Right, so those are the basic functions: move, rotate, and scale. You can also delete and such. By the way, by default in Maya, Z is undo, just Z. I don't know why that is. So yeah, if you make a mistake, press the Z button. Right, so to move around your workspace in Maya, you need to control the camera, which I find most easily with a mouse. Hold Alt and left click and you can sort of rotate the camera around the point where you clicked, like so. Hold Alt and middle mouse click to pan. Alt and right mouse click to zoom. So holding Alt is basically your control button. Alt and left click to rotate. Alt middle click to pan. Alt right click to zoom. You can also zoom in and out with a mouse wheel. So there are also different display modes for Maya. If you tap spacebar, it will bring up a bunch of these windows here. This one, I believe, is, this is orthographic from the top. There's orthographic from the front and orthographic from the side. This is useful for a number of reasons, which will become obvious later. Basically, if you want to know what your thing looks like from a particular angle, you can use these windows. If you click here, we get the panel layout, which is just a two-window thing. That's actually not what I meant to click. I meant to click this one. This one with like the bunch of abstract slider-looking things brings up our outliner, which is useful for basically keeping track of all the objects in your scene and the hierarchy in which they work. And you can use several of these at the same time. Like you can have the outliner while you have the 4 perspective windows up, etc. I like to keep the outliner active. All right. So let's get into components. So this toolbar over here, if you don't have it, it's this cube with like a hammer next to it. That is the component editor. So over here we have several different kinds of selection modes. We have polygon, which selects a whole polygon with this green outline. Vert select, edge select, and face select. Vert select lets you move vertices individually. All the moving editing components works exactly the same way as it does editing polygons, except scaling might not work for, well, scaling doesn't work for vertices for obvious reasons. But yeah, you can take individual vertices or multiple. If you hold Shift and click, it will select several of them. Control and click will deselect one at a time. You can also click and drag to select several, but be careful of that because you might select ones you didn't intend to select. You can do the same thing for edges. Edges can be scaled, however, and rotated. And faces. You can also even delete individual components. This is especially useful if you're, say, trying to attach 2 polygons and make them into one whole mesh. You don't want, say, for example, if I wanted to connect these 2 things, you don't want this, like, this gray mesh face stuck inside of your model. So you would, before connecting them, want to delete each of these faces. And then you can connect them on the edges, but we'll get to that. Okay. So, how do you edit polygons to be more complicated shapes? A number of these tools over here at the component editor are useful. As I said, editing individual components. But we also have things like combine, which lets you take 2 polygons and combine them and to be considered and move as one unit. So you can duplicate your cube here, or just create another shape if you want. To duplicate, it's Control-D, and it will just appear on top of your current one. You'll know you'll duplicate it if a second object appears in your outliner here. And then Shift select to select several at once, or click drag select, and then just hit combine, and now they're considered one object. And you'll see that they've gone into a group here in the outliner. And doing one thing to one affects the other, so you could delete them both at the same time, or whatever. If you have two separate polygons, or meshes rather, that you don't want to be combined, you can hit separate, and all the individual meshes will separate out. That also does funky things to the pivot point here, though. So to fix that, if you ever want to move the pivot point, hit insert, and then just click and drag it to where you want it to go. If you hold V while clicking and dragging it, conveniently it will snap to a vertice, to a vertex. So that's insert to activate moving the pivot point, hold V while moving it to snap it to a point. And as I said, when you combine and separate meshes, it will often do weird things to your pivot point for some reason. So just be warned. Okay, we'll go through a few of these other tools. Another important one for modeling is Extrude. So the way Extrude works is you start by selecting a face, or several, and then when you hit Extrude, you just pull out another piece directly from where you were selecting that face. And so now your mesh has more polygons than it did before, and it's bigger. And you can do this in a number of creative ways to make complicated objects. You can extrude several faces at once if you want. And it always adds detail and extends your mesh. Another really important tool is the edge loop, which bafflingly doesn't have an immediately accessible button. Instead, go to Mesh Tools, insert Edge Loop, and click and drag on an edge, and it will create a loop perpendicular to where you clicked. And this is really useful for adding a lot of extra edges and vertices for you to edit. So now that I have this edge loop, I can do something complicated like, make it sort of pot-shaped. More verts means more detail because it's more points for you to edit. Also, if you want to select an entire edge loop, you can just double-click one of its edges and the whole edge loop will be selected. And if Maya can detect that it's a clean edge loop, it will select the whole thing. Which is another good reason to use lots of edge loops because it makes doing things like this a lot easier. So use edge loops frequently. All right. Ooh, what's this? This is bad. This is bad topology because you can see that it is poking through to the other side of the model, which you don't ever want. It makes computations with the model complicated and it just looks ugly, so try to avoid that where at all possible. Non-manifold geometry, it's called. This is also an example of bad topology, because you see it's considered one polygon, but it has this weird like crease in it. So you want to try to avoid those two. Basically, to avoid that problem is don't wildly extrude like I was, and try to keep things in a more smooth way. I can look up an image to illustrate what I mean. So generally, when making anything, you want to A, use quads as opposed to tris, and B, keep all your verts basically equidistant from each other, except for where you want to add extra detail. So this is bad. We have a lot of like mixed quads and tris, and they're kind of like folding in on each other in places. And this one on the left would basically be impossible to animate without breaking the whole thing. This one on the right, though, all of it flows smoothly. The verts are basically equidistant from each other, only bunching up where they need detail for animation, like at the corners of the mouth and the eyelids. And that's basically how you avoid non-manifold geometry. Use quads and keep your edge flow and vert flow smooth. Anyway, so a lot of useful tools like the edge loop are in really annoying out-of-the-way places. So to fix that, let's do some hotkeys. To get your hotkey editor, go to Windows, Settings and Preferences, and Hotkey Editor. Because of course nothing in Maya is simple, it has this whole UI for editing hotkeys. But conveniently it has a search function that lets you search for what you want to rebind, so insert edge loop. Or just insert. I misspelled insert, that explains it. Insert edge loop. Click it, and then just put in what you want. You can also hold Shift, Alt, or Control to do it. I like to use Shift E. Is already assigned to set key rotate. I don't know what that is and never use it, so I'm not going to worry about it. And then save. You can also do this for like extrude. Whoops. Save. I like to set extrude to Control E. And I don't know about you, but every other program I've ever used uses just Control Z as undo, so I like to remove the Z hotkey for undo. But yeah, customize it however you feel is more comfortable. Getting used to hotkeys with an editor like this is very useful for making your process much faster and smoother. So we're going to save and close there. Another thing about settings, basically every tool in Maya has tool settings that you can access by double-clicking it. For this one, for example, gives a lot of options for how it works. So keep that in mind. If a tool doesn't give you exactly what you want, try double-clicking on it, and it'll bring up the settings menu. All right, so let's get into some more advanced poly editing tools. So I already went over relocating the pivot point. Okay. Yes?
How do you insert an edge loop in the center of something, like if you have a edge loop?
Like a vertical edge loop?
Yeah, just put it in the middle of two other edges. So if you have two other edge loops and you want to make it like the midpoint.
Oh, you want to snap to the midpoint?
Yeah.
Oh, there is a way to do that, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. If you have a question that I can't answer, and I apologize for that, usually Googling it will give it to you. So like when you're in the future, when you're on your own playing with this tool, if you have a question like that, Google it. Snap to grid, snap to curve. Yeah, no, there is a way, I think, to snap it to the middle. I mean, you can eyeball it, and it's not a big deal. But I think there is a way to do that. You'd have to look it up.
Is there a search in Maya for buttons like magnet or snap? Like you just type it in?
Not that I know of. I mean, other than in the edit hotkey, you can search for things, but you have to know like the name of them. Right. So a few other useful tools. We've got the attribute editor, which lets you edit the attributes of the things you're messing around with. So take a simple cube, for example. I just made another new cube. Oh, also, if you're stuck with these blue outlines and you don't know what's up, go to the component editor and select the mesh tool, so you're grabbing whole meshes. Anyway, back to the attribute editor. So just a cube on its own has a bunch of these different options. There's like a lot to learn when it comes to 3D art and assets. But we go to Polycube, there are some simpler attributes we can edit. A nice little scroll bar here where we can edit the width of the cube, the height, and the depth. And perhaps more interesting is subdivisions. which let us make even subdivisions of edge loops, as many as we want, really, on every axis. This is very useful, and it will help me illustrate soft selecting. So now we have a 13 by 13 by 13 cube just by scrolling through the attribute editor. Don't have to put in 13 individual edge loops on every side. Now, soft selecting is a very useful tool for fine mesh edits. So I select one point here, but if you tap B, now you're in soft select mode, and you can toggle between it by tapping B again and again. Now you'll see this little heat map here. When I click and drag the point, it will drag other points with it, where the more yellow they are, the more influenced they are. So I can make neat stuff like this cube with like a hole in it. If you want to edit the heat map, just hold B and click and drag, and you can make it bigger or smaller for finer control over your soft select. Very useful, especially when making characters or objects with a lot of curves. It's a good way to create natural curves. So remember soft select. That's just tap B, turn it on and off. It also works, you can soft select edges if you want, and faces, whichever you prefer.
I have a question.
Yep.
When I activate soft select, it selects everything. Do I turn on the heat map?
It selects everything?
Yeah, it selects every point.
Like it turns them all yellow, like
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
That just probably means the heat map is really big. Hold B and click and drag down to reduce it. Hmm? Say, you have a question? Any other questions while Ryan is figuring his thing out? Hmm? One moment, I'll take a look. Any other questions? All right, let's move on. Okay. Another useful tool, though one that's not quite as clean, is multi-cut. If ever you feel you just need to put an edge where one isn't and edge loop isn't doing it for you for whatever reason, multi-cut is a tool in the component editor. Click an edge or a point, and then click another edge or a point, and you cut through, and you have a bunch of new edges and points. This tool, yeah, this tool can be useful, but yeah, it has a tendency to create a lot of tries, which is not clean for animated geometry. But just consider it's a tool in your toolbox. Sometimes, when you have really complicated meshes, edge loops won't like go all the way around for whatever reason, so it's also useful for completing edge loops when that happens. Another tool we have here is bevel, which is pretty self-explanatory. If you select an edge, or a point for that matter, and click it, it will bevel it. And then if you click and drag on this fraction here, you can edit how big the bevel is. It also works on corners of verts, like so. So a couple more useful things. If you want to change the way that Maya is displaying your object, you can go to Mesh Display, and we can go to harden edge, and now we're Tron. You can also go to mesh display and soften edge, and we'll smooth everything out. So these are useful because sometimes, like, a soft edge on this corner here looks weird. That doesn't make any sense. It's like a 45-degree angle. Why would it be a soft edge?
And one word of warning, preset cylinders in Maya come to soften automatically, but if you extrude faces away from it, those are automatically bumps.
Yeah. So you can also go to individual edges, like this, for example. Select a bunch of these. What I'm doing is holding Shift to do additional select and double-clicking to select whole edges. And then you can individually go in and mesh display harden edge, and then just those have been hardened, and so it looks a little more natural. Ultimately, when you're in game engine, this is all down to like how the game engine renders it out, but this is useful for looking to see how you want it to look while in Maya. So if ever, for whatever reason, you do something like this and, oh no, there's black. Let me do a better example. That's a little too broken. Okay. 1 second. Oh no, somehow a black square got into my nice gray cube. So this means that the normal, meaning the render image of that polygon, is reversed. In most game engines, if you render this out, the black square will just be transparent. To fix this, go to Mesh Display, we'll select the face you want to affect, then go to Mesh Display, Reverse, and now it's back to normal. Black's on the inside, as it should be, and gray's on the outside. And finally, I should go over some display modes. If you hit 7, you go to the lighting option, which you'll notice is black because there are no lights in the scene. But when you do fiddle around with lights, that's how you look at them, by hitting 7. 6 will go back to shaded display with texture maps. 4 goes to wireframe, if you want to look at a wireframe. So that's 4, 6, and 7. 6 is basically the one we've been using. 4 is wireframe, and 7 is lit if you have light in the scene, which we don't. Okay, so I'm going to start by making something pretty basic and try to show you how all of these different tools come together to work. So we're going to make a house. House is probably basically a square shape, so I'll just start with a square. I want a fairly big house. Houses don't tend to be cubes, so let's stretch it out a little bit this way. And yeah, that looks about right. That looks like a house. It's starting to look like a house to me. Okay, so a house needs a roof. So let's extrude one out. Roofs tend to be a bit more triangular than this, so let's narrow that out. And okay, that's starting to look more like a house. What are we missing? Okay, probably a door. So let's put in some edge loops where we want this door to be. Maybe even have a nice frame for it. And let's select this face, and you can also extrude inward. And now we have something that's starting to look like a door. I'm going to extrude it again for some nice detail. Okay, now our house has a door. We can do the same thing for windows. Alright, this house is looking pretty nice, but I think it still needs something. How about a chimney and a fireplace? Real fancy. Put in a couple more edge loops. We can extrude out a chimney, but oh, it's facing the wrong direction. Well, then we can use the rotate tool and just realign it, move it into position, and keep extruding. And now we have a chimney. Though I think I want the chimney a little more to the right. Double click to select this whole edge loop. There we go. And in less than a minute, we have basically a house. I'm going to demonstrate one more useful tool by trying to make this roof a little more presentable. So I'm going to extrude all this out. Because I want it to overhang a little bit. Then we got this ugly whatever that is there. So let's get rid of that. To merge components together, you can use the, where is it? It's usually here. Target weld has disappeared from Maya 2017. Okay.
No, it's there. It's there.
Where's target weld?
Bottom right.
Quad draw.
No, up one.
Oh, okay. It looks different now. Sorry about that. Okay. So with target weld, click and hold on an edge, and then drag it to another edge, and magically it's gone. And you can do this several times.
Is there a way to select all of those and then just do it all at once?
Well, I think you can do that. I don't usually like to do that because it has... Can you do that? Yeah, no, not that I'm aware of, actually. Might have used to been able to do that, but I remember it like breaking things frequently. And so now we have a nice roof that also hangs out over the house. Magical. If we wanted to add even more detail to the house, we could maybe give it a porch. Extrude out. Get out of the way. Extrude again. Extrude again. And now we have a nice little stone in front of the door. Maybe separate this bottom part from the rest. We have a house. Simple as that. So next, I'm gonna do a bit of a follow along activity where we make a character, because I'm sure you're all interested in how to make 3D characters. So we're gonna start by going to, all right, I wanna make sure you all have that reference image, those 2 reference images from before downloaded. And we're going to go to the perspective planes from before. So, as you can see, we have a front hero guy and a side hero guy. When making characters, or making anything really, it's always very useful to work from reference, because we're trying to make things that are reflective of real life, so it's important to understand how things look in real life, or like if you're trying to bring your doodle to life as a 3D character, it's very important you work from reference so it doesn't wind up looking like uncanny and off. So what we're going to do is bring in an image plane. So from the front window here, go to View, Image Plane, Import Image, and one moment, I'm just going to move this stuff to my desktop so it's easier to find. Hero guy front, hero guy side. Yeah, make sure they're in a place where you can find, and then View, Image Plane, Import Image. And this is front, so double-click hero guy front. And now we have him right in our scene for us. I'm going to move him off the stage, out of our workspace. Make him a little bigger so he's easier to see. Press space to bring up these 4 windows, and you want to go to this front window here. Click View, Image Plane, Import Image. And then just find your file, and you can bring them in. We're going to do the same thing for the side, but this time we're going to import the hero guy side image. Actually, this is in the wrong point. You're going to want to take the front-facing image and move it back and forward until you find where it's behind the grid here, because you want it to be behind your grid. Side doesn't really matter, he just needs to be like... Actually, do the same thing with the side, make sure he's behind the grid here. See, if I move him too far to the right, he goes in front of it. You want him behind it. Try to make him about the same scale as front hero guy here. Easy way to do that is to like put them on a cross like this and try to line up their features basically. This is just a general outline for us, so it's not terribly important that they fit exactly. In fact, I'm pretty sure my original drawing does not fit exactly. Just make sure they're generally the same size, and then put them into position. Okay, now we've got some references. So there are many ways to go about modeling things. The way I like to do it is to draw up these cross sections of front-facing and a side-facing and import them, and then work from there. So generally when making a humanoid, I start with a cylinder. So we're going to make a cylinder. This cylinder is probably not going to really work for our purposes, so let's go into the attribute editor, polycylinder, and 20 subdivisions I think is too many to start. The thing about Maya is it's really easy to add detail. Removing detail is kind of a pain. You can do it, but you might not be super happy with the result. So I'm going to start with some fewer subdivisions, maybe like 12. Subdivision height, maybe like 10. Okay, that's I think a better looking cylinder for us. So we're going to be working in multiple windows, which is why having several monitors is very useful for modeling, because you always do stuff like this. So in the front-facing image plane here, click this transparent box to turn it into a wireframe. Now we can see through to our reference. So the goal here is basically to match up the vertices to match our drawing. So you can go on verts and click and drag over a line and then adjust it so it fits his torso. And then we keep doing this, and gradually, I promise, this strange shape will eventually start to look like our hero guy's torso. Again, if you don't feel like you have enough detail, don't worry about it. What we'll be doing is going back and adding more detail later. When you're starting to model something complicated, it's important to just block out the general shape you're going for. Don't worry about the arms or legs for now. We're just making the torso. Okay, from the front that looks pretty good. From the side, it's pretty grotesque. So we'll do the same thing here on the side. And adjust our verts. Best selecting a whole line of verts at a time until we have generally what we're looking for. Yes, this is a long and arduous process, but yeah, that's why, part of the reason why making games takes so damn long is stuff like this. Okay, now we have something that's looking more like a torso. Cool. We can get rid of those ugly segmentation lines by going to Mesh Display, Soften Edge. Awesome. We have what basically looks like a torso. Now, if we go and extrude the top here, sometimes Maya's own interface gets in the way of using Maya. I know this is a lot. No worry if you fall behind. So I've given you a few minutes. Don't worry if you can't keep up with me. I'm just going to continue with this demonstration and just take note of the process. So once we've lined up our torso basically with the front and side views of what we want it to look like, we're going to move on to another part or extend it into the neck. So you can either extrude the faces on the top or just click and drag, line this up with the width of the neck in both the side and front view, and then edge loop the part where we want to make it thinner, and do the same thing, just line it up with the neck. But he's got this neat little sweater collar thing, so to adjust for that, we can just use more edge loops, grab the edge, and adjust it accordingly. And boom, now we've got a sweater collar thing. To make the neck look a little more natural, we can grab this edge where the neck meets the sweater, pull it down, and now it actually looks like a collar. Maybe put an edge loop in here, adjust it slightly, and now it looks even more believable. Yeah. Adding edge loops is a good way to add smoothness to a model, just generally speaking. Hey look, now he has a sweater and a neck. Yeah, right? Well, this is not a rigging tutorial.
That's true.
Okay. So his head is basically a circle, so I think it'd behoove us to start with a circle. Or a sphere, rather. And we'll just use the default attributes of the sphere and do the same thing we did before, which is basically just match it from the front and the side to fit what we're looking for. Now, as you can see, his head isn't perfectly a sphere, but that's where soft select becomes very useful. So if we just go into vert select, select this vert near his chin, and activate soft select, and give us a sizable heat map, we can just click and drag, and while keeping that nice natural curve of his face, we can poke and prod various verts until it matches the shape we're looking for. And this will work for basically any shape that has curvature to it. If you're looking for more fine details, just decrease your heat map by holding V and clicking and dragging, or increase it to affect more of the shape. And we'll do that from the side too. And voila, we have a head shape. Bear in mind that character models don't necessarily have to be one continuous mesh. They can be individual meshes that work in one rig. That's like, there's really no reason you can't do that. Sometimes movement will just look more natural if things are connected as one mesh. What you can do, it's not that difficult. Basically, you just have to delete a hole into one mesh and connect it to the other one, vert by vert. We'll do that with the arms and legs. But for the head, I'm just going to stick it on the neck here. Remember that no matter what platform you're developing for, you're working with a detail budget. So while it might seem attractive to give everything a million vertices, some things you should just, sacrifice detail on. Like the eye circles don't need to have as many edges as the head circle does because they're much smaller and no one will notice if they have less detail. Both eyes should be exactly the same, so you can just duplicate it and drag it over. And again, don't worry if it doesn't match exactly with the drawing, because the drawing is just basically a guideline. There, we've got a head with eyes. As for the mouth, you could physically model the mouth into the model a number of ways. You could, for example, you can extrude inward and shrink down the gap and add edge loops around here until you have a really detailed around this mouth area. To keep this simple, I'm not going to bother modeling the mouth, because another thing you can do is once you learn about textures and UV mapping and such, you can just put the mouth as part of his texture and it would look just fine. Basically, that just means the image that is drawn in place of this matte gray here, you can just draw a mouth on it and it'll look like he'll have a mouth just fine. A lot of games still use textures this way to add certain details. We're not going to go over texturing in this tutorial. This is basically just an introduction to Maya as a tool and how it can be used for modeling. But yeah. He's also got a hat. The hat's also pretty roundish, so I'm just going to use another circle. Once again, just match the shape to what you're looking for. And for curved objects, you can go to soft select to really finely move it around. And then you've got the beginnings of a hat. Again, it's important to start with basic shapes first and then work up with the amount of detail you want to give it. Doing things like straight from the orthographic views is fine, but also make sure you look back at the main model every once in a while to see if it's working and if it looks like what you're looking for from other angles. If I want to put a rim on this hat, I'm thinking I would probably just extrude one out. And we could use the handy target weld tool to make this rim look a little more natural. Now he's got a rim on his hat. I'll give you another moment if you want to mess around a bit more. Again, if you're not catching up perfectly, don't worry about it. This is mostly just a demonstration. Okay. So the next step in making a humanoid is basically attaching their limbs. It's pretty important. So since usually when you're making humanoids for games, they're going to be built to animate, you're going to want to really focus on the points of articulation between the torso and the limbs, so shoulders and pelvis. So to do this, we're going to make the arms and legs separately and then attach them to the torso. Click this bottom point here and pull it out to where the bottom of the torso is. And then we'll add another edge loop. Oh no, it doesn't want to create an edge loop, so instead we'll just grab this and pull it down and add an edge loop here instead. Okay. Then we're going to delete a bunch of faces off the side, because that's where we'll be attaching the leg. Drag some verts around to make this socket a bit more roundish. And let's see here. This socket has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 edges. Oh, nice even number. I like that. So we're going to make another cylinder. And we're going to make sure that it has 8 subdivisions on its axis. So this way, it can nice and neatly fit in that socket when we attach it. So to make limbs, it's basically the same process as everything else. Just take your edge loops and make them line up with your reference image. You might want to take the topmost edge loop and rotate it slightly to face towards the socket, so it'll be easier to attach. To attach this leg, select both of these and combine them. Now, take the target weld tool and just weld each edge to its corresponding edge. Oh, I almost forgot. You don't want faces on the inside of your model, so delete the top of this cylinder before you go any further. And finish attaching it. Now his leg's attached. And it looks a little wonky, but we can fix that. By again, just lining it up with what we want it to look like via the image plane. So generally when creating characters, you want to make them in this basic pose, which is called the T pose because it's shaped like a T. And the reason that is because in the process of rigging characters for animation, you're going to have to do some fine edits on how the rig affects the mesh, which is much easier if the character is kind of splayed out without his arms at his side, so thing doesn't get confused between arms and ribs and whatnot. This is basically the simplest pose that lets you edit it in such a way that it's not confusing Maya or the game engine. So we'll add some more edge loops to this leg to add more detail. And now we have something that looks like a leg. Mesh display, soften edge, and it'll look a little bit better. There you go. Now, that was fun and all, but I kind of don't want to do it again. So, if you're making a symmetrical object, there is a way to just not have to do everything twice. Select half of it and make sure you're selecting half of it exactly. Delete. Now, with the object you want to mirror selected, go over here, double click it so we can bring up the settings. It's this icon, mirror. And we have some options here. So we can choose what axis we want to mirror it across. So we can apply, and oh, that worked just fine. With merge border vertices, Maya will automatically merge them together along the mirrored axis. So see, it's just connected there. If the automatic process is giving you some trouble, you can also deselect this and do not merge borders and then just merge them yourself. But ours conveniently merged pretty smoothly. So now we have a symmetrical pair of shorts. So you can do basically the same thing for the arm. We're going to add a couple more edge loops for detail. I want the arm socket to be generally circular, because the arm is going to be generally cylindrical. And how many edges we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Another nice even number. Create another cylinder. Have it have 8 axis subdivisions, a few height subdivisions for detail. And again, just arrange it so it fits our arm. Oops. Combine the two. Delete the faces off the cap of the cylinder. And attach them. And then just line up verts until it fits. Okay, and again, we can mirror it to give him a second arm if we want, which we probably want to do. Boom, 2 arms, magical. Now, here's an important point. If you're making a character to be animated, like in a game or in a movie or whatever, Again, you're going to want to focus on a lot of detail on points of articulation, like his knees or his the hip here, armpit, that sort of thing. So you're going to want a lot more detail there than we have here, because here, if you think about it, there are only like a few squares for Maya to deform when you're animating him. So if you're making a character to animate, you want to have a lot of nice squares flowing in a curved motion here. Like to bring up this example again. See how we have a lot of quads sort of bunched up, but still in an even kind of flowing pattern? That's what you want around any point of articulation on a model that's to be animated. We're not building this model to animate, but just for the record. The final real step of making a humanoid is adding hands and feet, which also works very similar to the way that arms and legs do, where you just create a shape with the right number of edges to fit into a slot. In the case of hands and feet, the best object to start with is generally a square, because if you look at your hand, it's kind of like a box on which other boxes come off. Conveniently, I didn't give this character any fingers, so his hand should be really simple to make. This slot here has it should have 8, again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, yeah. It has 8 edges, so this box is going to need some edge loops. That is 6 edges, 8 edges. Scale it to fit. Yes. Combine. Make sure there be no faces on the inside of the mesh. And then weld everything together. From here, again, just move things about until they fit the shape you're looking for. Edge loops are your friend. Use them a lot. Whenever something looks too blocky to you, you think it needs more curves, just add an edge loop. And if you want to edit a curved object, again, soft select is very helpful for that. Like, I want this mitt thing to be a bit soft, a bit flatter. Maybe a little longer too. Making fingers, again, they're basically just boxes or cylinders that come off of the main box of the hand. So I'm going to try to give his thumb a little detail, so I'm going to add an extra edge loop in here so we can have an 8-edged cylinder for his thumb. Actually, I guess that's 6-edged, but you know what I mean. And we'll extrude it out. And keep adding edge loops and messing with the shape until it fits what we're looking for. And bam, he's got, and again, this is why the image plane is just a guideline. This kind of looks stupid from the side, so want to just edit that a bit. And it doesn't match up exactly with the image plane, but that's fine because it looks good in 3D space. There we go. Do a few more edits here and there, but you get the idea. If he were to have fingers, it works basically the same way. I recommend using a picture of a hand for an image plane whenever you're making a hand. Just edge loops, edge loops, edge loops, edge loops. And then extrude a finger, extrude another finger, extrude a fourth finger, or third finger rather. You get it. And when working off of a reference, you can see exactly how long fingers are supposed to be in relation to each other, whereas I am just like guessing. And then you again add more detail with edge loops. If you want to make a hand to animate, I recommend putting a bit of a space in between here, like separating it with another edge loop. But that's the general idea. And feet are basically just weird shaped hands, so that also works the same way. You can start with a box, or you can extrude out, whichever you prefer. Get the basic shape you're looking for, add edge loops, rinse, repeat. Tweak your shape. So yeah, you can make a simple character model in under half an hour. Speed and precision of your models just comes with practice, so I recommend just making a doodle and trying to bring into 3D and just try to improve on something every time you do it. Maya is a very finicky program, and it'll crash, things will not work the way you think they will, things will break. Just keep at it like anything else, it just takes practice. And there we go, we have our hero guy in magical 3 dimensions. Just combine all his pieces, and woo! I brought the doodle to life. Always look at your model from multiple angles while you're doing it. Make sure it looks nice. And keep in mind where, if you're making it for a game, keep in mind where the player will be looking at this model. So from behind. Like if I were to go back, I would probably adjust the size of this hat a bit, so it's a little less triangular in the back. But yeah, that's the basics of 3D modeling in Maya. You got a lot of tools at your disposal, so you'll memorize them as you go. Always work from reference. Using image plane references makes creating complicated models much easier. Edge loops are your friend. Save often. Save multiple files of each of your projects. And if you need to troubleshoot, just Google, because if you have a problem in Maya, I guarantee someone else has had it. People have had every problem under the sun with Maya. And that basically concludes our workshop.